Hi everybody, how are you guys doing? So this is my first tutorial in Logic for the fall 2020 semester. Today I'm covering the basics of Logic. So this is mostly, I would have to say, for my students that were in 206 in the spring, and we obviously got derailed when we went home and you guys didn't get nearly enough experience in Logic. So I'm trying to cover the basics so that we can get started on our first assignment, which is to create a collage of sound like we did at the beginning of 206, using sounds you recorded yourself only. So these are the things I'm going to be covering in today's video lesson, and we will be jumping right into Logic on Thursday, or well, today and Thursday, obviously, if you're in class. You might also hear some thunder because it's pretty rainy here and stormy. So anyway, so I will be covering today the program layout in Logic, importing audio and using audio, editing audio, using software instruments, and using plugins. So this is kind of the general gist of everything. Mostly I'm going to spend my time talking about the program layout, how to do specific things, and what have you in Logic. One other thing that I wanted to point out to you, and I just found this out today, there is a free trial of Logic right now for 90 days, which is really great. I've actually never seen this before. The sad thing is that it requires a Mac. So that's the biggest barrier probably for people using it and getting it. But if you have a Mac, you can download Logic and install it on your machine for 90 days. Now, obviously, I looked around. I could not find when this was going to end. But you might want to be strategic about this. If you waited till, for instance, the middle of September, then you'd have middle of September, middle of October, middle of November, middle of December. You could basically, or middle of November, you could use Logic at home for quite a while. So just keep that in mind. Again, if you don't have a Mac, this doesn't help you at all, but it is something that's useful. As John mentioned too earlier, there is a Logic update, and unfortunately, man, it's just classic the way the world works. The Logic update is pretty substantial. There hasn't been a substantial update like this in probably a decade, and then the one semester I don't update Logic in the lab, there's a major update. The one thing that I will tell you is that the new update doesn't really change the GUI layout at all. There are a bunch of new instruments and a bunch of new plugins that are really great, and you will get those if you download Logic for 90 days. They will be in there, but it really doesn't change the overall program in any way. It makes it way better. In fact, it's funny because the new instruments really improve a lot of the things that I love about Ableton. Way better sampling, way better sample usage. It's pretty interesting what they've done. They're really skewing towards the way Ableton does things. So anyways, just keep that in mind. If you do download this, it is a little bit different, okay? So let's go ahead and get started though. And just so you know, I am using the newest version of Logic. So this looks a little bit different than it does in the MIDI lab. For instance, if we zoom in here, there's this new button right here, okay? These two new buttons are a little bit different because there's this new way of doing audio and stuff, or doing tracks. So that's just one example. There's a bunch of stuff, but this is basically what Logic looks like in the lab. And just to get started, obviously at the top here, we have the track bar, right? Or the transport, it's often called. And it gives you all sorts of information about toolkits. So over here on the far left are my toolkits. In fact, if I click on this button, it pulls down another menu of toolkits, which actually I find pretty useful. I tend to use that a fair amount when I'm using Logic. There's also buttons for different views. So if I click on this one, for instance, I get some control over the synthesizer that I've chosen, or if it's an audio track, then I get control over some of the other parameters. Okay, if I go, for instance, to EQ, notice it just added a graphic EQ in here, but now I also have a little window here for changing the EQ. Same thing with the mixer. If I can pull up the mixer view, which it looks like this, and then that again is going to display all the tracks from left to right and their plugins, which is very useful for mixing and mastering, and it's very useful for doing global changes because then all the tracks are kind of together. If I close these, this also pulls up the editor window. The piano roll is the most common that you'll use if you're using a track, if you're editing MIDI notes or what have you. And then there's also an audio editor, okay? So the transport, and then next to the transport are obviously the actual transport objects, which are, you know, stop the track, play the track, record. This is the cycle or looping object. This is obviously rewind and fast forward. And then in here is our main transport information, right? And this tells me all about where I am in the song or in the track. It gives me bars and beats. Now I have to say, I almost always pull down this little menu. So you can see to the far right here is a little pull down menu. And I can choose different things here. If, for instance, I can actually also open a separate window, but most commonly, I actually choose this custom one because what it does is it gives you a nice big window and actually gives you all sorts of, it just kind of gives you everything. So it gives me my quantization division level, it gives me my tempo or my time signature, gives me my tempo here. It also tells me where the locator is in the track, right, at all times. This is for locators, which is this thing. This is the left side or the right side of the locator. Here's the right side of the locator. So that's what these numbers are in this blank area. These is the playhead position. So this tells me where above in time the playhead is, okay? So right now I'm at 1 second. I think that's 1 second, yeah. So these are seconds, and then minutes are here, and then hours are here. I have to say, I still don't understand why there's always a 1 there displayed in the hours window, but there's always a 1 there. Below that, it shows you where the position is in terms of measures, right? So it shows me what measure, what beat of the bar, and what tick. So these are the ticks, and then you can see now I'm in measure 3, and now I'm in measure 4, 5, 6, right? So this tells me where in the measure I am exactly, all right? If we go over further this way to these buttons, actually, what is this button? I don't replace. I can't even remember what that does. I never use this button. This is the metronome or tuning button for audio, I believe. This is the solo button. This is the count in button, right? This is for counting in measures. So if I want to record something, I can do one, it'll tick 1, 2, 3, 4, and then start recording, okay? And if I click on this little arrow at the bottom, I can actually pull down a menu, come on, or I can right click on this and say how many bars I want. Do I want 2 bars? Do I want 4 bars? And again, I'm right clicking. And that sets how long my count in is. If I want to turn the actual metronome on, this is the button for that, okay? So it's also the K key, as you can see, K. And that allows me to select and unselect this button, which turns the metronome on. You can also have the metronome on. If you right-click it, you can go to Metronome Settings, actually, and change things like have it only click when you're recording. You can change the pitch and the tuning of the metronome. So if I open that window, actually, here it is. I can, right here, change the tone of the metronome and the volume. So I often have students change the tone and metronome if they're having issues matching the tempo. So if they're trying to record something with the keyboard and they can't hear it very well and they're not, that's what you do. You right click on the metronome, you can go to the metronome settings, and you can change that nicely, okay? This is the interesting button here. So next to that is the volume, okay? Now, don't get confused about your track. This is actually just literally the volume of the track. It has nothing to do with whether or not you're actually boosting the gain of your individual tracks or the mix. So for instance, if I crank this all the way up, it's not going to clip in a bounce, okay? Because I'm basically, all I'm doing is increasing the volume of the output to the speakers. I'm not changing the actual gain of my track. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is just your volume control. And it's kind of best to leave this at 0 because you don't want to be fooled into thinking something's loud enough when it isn't. All right, and then these last 4 windows here show you open up different panels here on the far right. So if I click on the first panel here, it's the list editor. You know, we're not going to really get into this stuff, but you can actually, this can be pretty powerful at times trying to select specific things. So for instance, you can select like all the markers, you can select specific tempos, and as you write a piece of music, this will fill up with like literally all of the data about your project. Every single note, every single program change, every single pitch bend data point, all of that piles up into the event list, which is just a massive, turns into a massive list of things, okay? Next to that is the Notepad, which I've also never used. I literally think this is for write. I couldn't even tell you what it does. I think you can write in here. Yeah, you can write like intro equal until bar 10. So maybe you're working with a singer and you want to put some notes in here for recording session later or something. You can do that, okay? So anyways, I've never used this though, probably because anyways. The looper, here's the looper, you know, the famous looper that I don't like and I complain about and don't want you using. So just remember that I do want to hear and see your own ideas, not Logic Pro's ideas and Apple Inc. drum beats in your tracks. What I want to see is the work you can do. I want original work in the class. Blah, blah, blah. You've heard this before. So, and then the last one is the media or project. It's basically the, what do they call this exactly? If I mouse over, it'll stop. The browser, right? So the browser will tell me all of the files inside the project, okay? So as I add things to this track, in fact, let me just go and open an actual song. Let me see, open recently. Here we go, perfect. So this, okay, sure, whatever, errors. Oh, and there's my, of course, classic. I have so many MIDI arrange windows in here open. So I can just close all those. I also want to close this. Don't save. So here's an actual song. If we go back again into the browser, the most common thing that you use actually is this window here, which shows all of the audio files for this project, okay? And these are all the audio files for this entire project. Included in them is every single region of these audio files, okay? So notice, for instance, I'm using this piano loop, which is actually a recording of, oh, it's bouncing. It's gonna take forever. No, it shouldn't take too long. Anyways, you can see that at the top it says piano_loop1.aif. That's an single audio file. And then below it are all the instances of this audio file in the actual song, right? All of these little clips that are generated from that one single recording. And that one single recording is generating all of these different links, okay? So that also gets to another point. Remember, we talked about this before. If you do destructive editing to the original audio file, it will edit every single instance of that, every single other region of that audio file inside the program, okay? So obviously you have to be careful about editing audio because it will change every instance of that same audio file in the course of the song, okay? So, and there are ways around that. It's really simple. We'll get to that. We don't need to worry about that right now. But the browser, this can be useful, especially for finding missing files and relinking things. Sometimes, too, I like to go through here. Well, that's really the biggest reason for it, is that I'm looking for files that got lost. But yeah, that's basically what I use this for. There's also the media, which I can actually import audio files and specific things if I want. Movies, if I'm doing a video editing, I can import from there. So this kind of allows you to import video and audio straight from the mixer, from Logic, instead of going to the desktop. Okay, so that's the transport, the main transport at the top. Okay, and I'm gonna actually just go back to the default. Let's just start a new project again. Close, don't save. Let me just select Alchemy here. So remember, let's go back to the beginning here. Remember, when Logic opens for the first time, or when you open it, it asks you what type of track you want, because right away it doesn't want you to open it. You can't open a project in Logic without one track. So basically it's saying, what kind of tracks do you want to make, right? So remember, these are the most common things we use are audio and software instruments. These are really the two. You can use guitar and bass as well, but really these two are the ones we want, okay? The drummer is actually, remember that annoying racist drummer that I don't like? That is the drummer. Actually, I wonder if Logic has finally gotten rid of that. I'll be curious. I watched a whole video about Logic's changes and there was no mention of it, but it's possible they finally got rid of Kyle and Taquan, the drummers, right? Or whoever, right? So anyways, so if I'm gonna choose a software instrument or an audio track, remember that there are two types of tracks in Logic. Either you're using a plug-in instrument and making sounds with that, or you're using an audio recording in some way inside your track, okay? And I can tell you right now, your first project here, because the entire thing is generated from sounds you make yourself, it will most likely be all audio tracks, okay? Now, if you use the sampler, that will change, obviously, because the sampler allows you to plug audio files into it, and then you can record or actually play an instrument with it, okay? So if I choose a software instrument, first of all, it's going to ask me what instrument I want, okay? And here's the whole list here. You can see actually some of the new ones. This is Quick Sampler. It's not available in the MIDI lab. It's a new Logic instrument. The sampler also, but we can sample plenty in Alchemy, so that's not really a problem. You can say open the library or close the library, and the library is going to be a big list of all of the instruments available in that instrument itself. So if I open the library and I install Alchemy in the track, all of the possible Alchemy configurations that are presets are opened in the library, okay? I can also increase the number of tracks. So here I could say I want 5 Alchemy tracks, okay? I can also change the inputs and outputs. So anyway, so that's for a software instrument. If I go audio, remember that if I'm just playing a recording, so imagine I've recorded something and I'm using it for my track and I want to play it back, right? I would say no input, because the input is the actual recording. An input represents more like a microphone, right? If I'm recording live, I would want to say input 1, all right? That's the first input. Or if I had more inputs, they would be listed here. If I am just playing a recording, I would say no input, all right? And say I want to make 5 audio tracks, I put 5 here, I say create. And you can see the first thing that happens is Logic has created 5 audio tracks for me here, okay? So, and remember, audio tracks and MIDI tracks are different, and you can't plug in audio into a MIDI instrument and vice versa. You can't plug an instrument into an audio track. So just keep that in mind when you start working on your projects, right? Like, it's easy to think that you've got it right, and then you can't, for some reason, oh, I can't get audio into this track. It's because you're using a MIDI track, right? So a MIDI track too, I can also use these 2 buttons right next to them to add new tracks. And honestly, to me, one of the most useful buttons in Logic is this duplicate track button. Because as you know, I love to talk about variations of things, right? So it's really useful to take a track that's doing something, duplicate it, and make some small changes for another iteration of the same thing, right? That has a little bit different EQ or whatever. So, but here, if I say new track, then it pulls up this menu again. I can choose software instruments and create, okay? So you can also drag these tracks around and change their arrangement if you want. You can click on these and rename them, which I really recommend, like clap, right? Voices, whatever. If I want to put names on these tracks, names can be very useful. They really can save you a lot of time because we tend to, the more organization you have, the better, the more streamlined your workflow will be, and it'll work better, right? So if I name these, then I'm not fumbling around looking for what track is what. This is an instrument track, and you can see it's a little bit different. It has a little instrument image. The icon is different. I can actually change the icon over here in this track list, in the track channel. If I click on this icon, I can choose something else if I wanted. Actually those look new too. I think these icons are new. But I could choose a different keyboard, I don't know, whatever. If you had string instruments, you could choose different instruments there. Obviously it just depends on what you're trying to do, okay? So the panner is to the far right here on the channel strip. And notice that this panner also changes the panel to the panner over here, because it's really, this is the exact same knob, right? And what else here? We have a solo button and a mute button, and then we have the record arm button. So this button, the R button here, enables the track for recording. So if we want to record onto a track, we can click the enable track recording button, and that will allow us to record onto that track, okay? This is the main volume of the track, and this does affect the clipping and the output of the actual track. Notice as well that it's also linked to this slider, because they are basically the exact same slider. They're just giving you two places for it, okay? I can also change the size of this if I want. One button that I find really useful in Logic is to go up here to View and say Zoom Focused Track. Okay, if I turn that on, when I click on a track, it makes it bigger. Okay, and this gives me a chance to actually, like, the track I'm working on becomes expanded so that I can see it better. All right. Okay. So that's the track headers here. Let's talk about the channel strip, okay? So let's not worry about this regions or this track info here. I can change the name here. I can do other stuff in there. Let's talk about the main mixer of the channel strip header here, okay? So you can see, first of all, there are two channel strip headers. The first one is on the left, and then the second one is on the right. The way Logic works is that the channel strip on the left is the actual channel strip for the track I'm in, okay? So as I click on these different tracks, you can't really see it, but notice that down here at the bottom it says Audio 5, right? And now if I click on this instrument, it says Instrument 1. So the channel strip is changing to whatever channel I click on, and if I, for instance, had some effects in here, whatever, the different effects would pop up in those windows. Okay, so if I click on auto filter, you can see now if I click on the voice, you can see the delay is in there, and then I click down and I'm on the next track. Okay, so the first things are the settings button is actually really cool because you can actually load in a setting for your channel strip. The EQ button, if I double click in here, it's actually going to add an EQ to the channel strip, and it's going to show it in this little window. Now remember with EQ, you probably don't remember because it's been so long since we did this, the EQ should be at the top, okay? So EQ is one of the first things you want to add. And then you can see if I zoom out, if I click on the EQ, it should pop up like this in a window, and this is where I can edit what frequencies are coming out, right? Which ones are being emphasized or what have you with the EQ. And then I can add other effects underneath, okay? So if I go down here to channel strip, I can add a delay, I can add whatever I want, right? So anyways, and remember, my plugins, this is my audio plugin effects. They work in series. So the first one at the top happens first, then it goes down the next one, to the next one, to the next one, and what have you. The input here is related mostly to audio tracks. So again, if I have a microphone and I want to record with a microphone, I would choose, for instance, input 1. Now, I really recommend if you are not using a microphone, then input should be 0, no input. Because it's CPU intensive for the computer to be sitting there listening to a microphone or listening to a microphone that's doing nothing, okay? So there's no reason to have live microphones running while you're doing nothing with them, okay? It's just a CPU killer. There's no reason for it. So no input should be your selection. I also recommend no, even if you're using a microphone, when you're not using that mic, your input should be set to off, okay? There's no reason to have input on at all if you're not using a mic, all right? And again, notice if I go down to the instrument, it looks a little bit different, and I'll get to this in a minute, but there is no input because the input is actually a software instrument. So it's different. So going back here, the sends, we got to this in 206 last semester, but not very well. We're going to cover this again. I don't even want to talk about it. It's complex. The next thing is the output of this track. So the output here is stereo, the stereo output. I can also group tracks together. This is the button for my automation mode. So remember about replace, like if I change this to touch, then I can write automation data in real time. I can use latch and write. Most commonly I use just touch. It's kind of the best, it's mostly used. Really important though too with this is that you turn it back to read when you're finished. The last thing, and again, this is your panner, right? So all the way right is going to be, it says plus 63. All the way left is minus 64, all right? And then my main output here, this is my gain object for the track is right here, okay? So just one other thing too. You'll notice down here on my audio track that I have a mute and solo button down here. I also have a record enable button. Okay, and I also have what's called the input monitor. This is the input monitor button, the I button, okay? So I'm gonna change actually my input to my microphone. I'm gonna say input 1. And if I turn on the I, you can see now, why isn't it monitoring? Oh, because I have no input for the program. If I had an input microphone on, it would show a level on the mic. Okay, so I would see the microphone level popping here to let me know what the level is so I can adjust the gain on the microphone. So that's what the input monitor does. It just monitors the actual channel and tells you how loud your microphone is running at, okay? Anyway, so that is it for the channel, the main channel strip. Next to that channel strip is always a secondary channel strip. And almost all the time, that main secondary channel strip is a stereo output, okay? So that's the main outs, like that's the collection of all my tracks together, come out the stereo output. There's a mute button, there's a bounce button actually, which is again, that's taking all my tracks and baking them together into a single final mix. That's the bounce button. You notice here I don't have any sends, I don't have an output because the output is the output, it's the main output. And I can add effects if I want, and the two little dot lines here, or sorry, these two little spheres are showing me that it's a stereo track. If I clicked on it one time, now it's a mono output, which means only one channel, right? There is no right and left. There's only mono, which means that everything is coming out equally on both speakers, okay? So, and obviously we don't really use mono for output like that. We don't really do mono output anymore. But you can add main effects to the main outputs. One thing to notice is that these outputs, this channel strip will change depending on whether I click on something. So imagine if I had a send, for instance, to bus 21 and a send to bus 24. If I click on this, it actually, this channel strip becomes that new bus. Okay, so it's just showing me those outputs are now bus 24. See how it says bus 24 here? So I'll cover this a lot more when we get into routing signal and stuff like that. What else do I want to cover? So one thing that a couple things. For this first assignment, you're going to be importing and using audio in Logic, okay? Now, say I want to use an audio file, okay? So I'm going to use this Fratras 1 track. It's on my desktop, actually. So all I'm going to do to use this track, all I have to do is click on it and drag it into the window. Now, if I have an audio track already made, I can just drag and drop it onto that audio track and it will add it, okay? I can also, if I drag this into the empty space on the screen, it will add this to it will make a new track and put it in there, okay? So notice now I have a new track called Fratras 2, and Fratras 2 is on that track, right? So you can add audio all day if you want in Logic. Add audio files to your tracks just by dragging and dropping. No big deal at all. Notice that they get added as well to my list of audio files, okay? So now I have this track in here and I can use it to edit things. I can option drag and make copies, right? I can take this copy and reduce it down to smaller size. Maybe I'm looping just a little piece of this, and now I'm going to option drag and repeat this, right? So you get the idea. Like, I can also grab all of these, Command C, move my cursor, hit Command V, and it will paste them in. So, but again, if I go to my list, notice that now I have all these regions, and they have been generated from this single audio file right here, right? So a couple other useful tools about audio and audio editing. If I go to the end of my track, remember, sorry, I meant to mention this. The tool, or I should talk about this now, is the tool palette in the main Arrange editing window. So if I click on T, the letter T on the keyboard, it's going to open up my tool palette, okay? And the tool palette shows me all these different things that I can use to edit the track, right? For instance, the text tool, if I want to rename this, I could call this whatever, and there I've renamed it. If I grab the scissors, I can cut this I can cut the region into another part. If I want to glue two regions together, I can select T and then grab the glue and then shift click and it will, shift click and it will add them together. Do you want to make a new audio file, continuous? Yes, and there it is. It glued them together, right? And actually made a new audio file doing that. So, and then probably the most useful tools that you're going to use are, first of all, just the pointer. But there's also this fade tool, okay? So if I click on the fade tool, I can actually add a fade at the beginning of my track or a fade at the end of my track, which can be useful for making a track fade out, right? So I don't get clipping at the ends of it. So these little fades can be really helpful and useful. One of the most useful tools as well is just being able to zoom in and out. So see how I'm zooming in and out here on the Arrange window? I can also go up and down. I am doing that by holding down Command plus the arrow keys, okay? So Command plus the arrow keys is basically, these are your zooming tools in Logic. And they're, obviously it's really useful to be able to zoom in and out, to fine-tune something, to be able to move this fade or just where I want it, or to make it inaudible by just having it at the very tippy end of this track. I don't want to hear the fade, I just want it to prevent clipping. Okay, so Command arrows up and down and left and right allows you to zoom in and out like this, all right? What else? So I don't want to get too much into MIDI editing right now, but again, your MIDI tracks look different, right? Because they need a MIDI region. And the easiest way to get a MIDI region actually is to hit T. Well, the easiest way is to record. So I can hit the R key here. I can go to the beginning of my track by hitting return. And actually, if I hit the R key, it's going to start recording. Now, if I had a MIDI keyboard, I don't have one hooked up to my keyboard, but if I hit Command K, I can pull up this little MIDI keyboard. And now watch, as soon as I hit R, it's going to count in, first of all. The count in is right here. And it's going to start recording. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I can... Beautiful piece. You can see now I have created a region with MIDI, okay? And it shows the MIDI notes here. And if I double click on this, it will open these MIDI notes down here at the bottom, okay? And it just shows you the MIDI notes that I played and the MIDI, the region. Now, one thing you can do too is if you don't want to record in, I can hit T for tool palette, go to pencil tool and add regions, okay? Now, one thing to be really careful of is notice when I zoom in here, let me zoom in. If I go to the top, you can see that my cursor is a little loop. And what that's going to do actually is loop this track. So imagine I had some MIDI in here. Let me add some MIDI notes. Go back to the pointer. Add some MIDI notes in here with the pencil. Okay, so I have some MIDI notes now with the pencil. If I use the looper, what it's going to do is loop this over and over and over. And you guys know I'm not a huge fan of the looper because nobody wants to hear the same thing exactly the same for 20 minutes or 5 minutes or even 2 minutes. So create some variation instead. And you could do that actually really easily by doing this. If I grab this in the center, hold down Option and drag, I can make copies of this. And then those actual copies can be edited differently from the original, okay? But if you'll notice, if I go down to the bottom of that track, the cursor turns into this little expander object, right? Which says, which allows me to make this region longer, okay? So now the region is bigger, but it's not the looper tool. So just keep that in mind. That is how you edit MIDI. We'll talk about MIDI editing a lot more later in the semester. Right now this first track is going to be sounds you record yourself. So it will probably be a mixture of using the sampler, which I will go over in class today and on Thursday. So let me just look at my PowerPoint here and see if I have any other things that I'm missing. Audio editing, or editing audio, we talked about basically, right? Importing audio, we talked about. Software instruments, I talked about a little bit. Remember, let me just mention a little bit more about software. And we did talk about adding plugins so just to cover this one more time so you remember. The plugins go into the audio effects, right? So if I wanted, for instance, to add a bit Crusher Distortion, I click on that, and then it pulls up that plugin. So that plugin is now right here. Here's the plugin, Bit Crusher, it says. And I can change these. Now remember, there are often presets for all these plugins, and you'll find them in this factory default. When you pull that down, you can choose a different preset, okay? Remember, when you close this window, you're not actually removing the Bit Crusher. All you're doing is closing that Bit Crusher window, and then I can reopen it by clicking Bit Crusher here, and there it is. So most commonly what you're going to do is actually close this. If you wanted to turn this Bit Crusher actually off, then you can click on this button here, and that bypasses the Bit Crusher for now and turns it off. But that's how the plugins work. And if I want to add another one, I can just add another one, right? Like whatever, a modulation delay. And I can literally just pile them up one after another. Experiment with how things sound too, the more plugins you add. Again, plugins are audio effects, but they work on MIDI as well, right? They can be used for MIDI instruments as well as audio instruments. So they are very, very useful. All right, so I think that's enough for today. So I will be posting this video on YouTube, and I will send you a link to that. And then this is on Tuesday, today in class, or on Thursday, this is what we'll be doing basically, is starting to talk about our projects and and planning for what we're going to be doing on this first project. Okay. I also want you, of course, to listen to the first project. So please go to, if I go to Google Classroom, if I go to 325. So I posted under classwork here, assignment. So for Tuesday and Thursday, there are some listening. So please listen to these 2 tracks. And usually I'm going to use YouTube mostly, but sometimes I might post a Spotify link too if people have Spotify. I'm going to post them in there. So these are your assignments for this week. And then your assignment 1 is the actual assignment. So we'll talk more about this. And we'll get into that today in class, okay? So if you have any questions, send me an email, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.